The word pro is supposed to mean something: mastery, precision, professional. But somewhere along the way, it kind of shifted. It started to mean exclusive, premium, or really just more expensive. And to some extent, that's been the story of the iPhone ever since the first Pro model. But this year, something's different. The iPhone 17 Pro and Pro Max feel like Apple finally backing up the Pro label with the kind of hardware that actually earns it. So after using the 17 Pro Max for 2 months, here are my thoughts. So right off the bat, this year's Pro iPhones look very different from years past. Apple's gone with a full unibody design, so no more glass sandwich with a separate frame, which by the way, that sandwich terminology is a bit problematic, but that's outside of the scope of this video. Anyways, it definitely looks a lot more like a tool and less like a fashion piece, but it's still unmistakably an iPhone. The back does have a ceramic shield glass cutout for wireless charging, but the rest of the body is a single piece of aluminum. So this is a pretty big departure from the last few years of iPhone design, and when they first announced it, I am not gonna lie, I did not like it. The two-tone idea kind of looked weird, the camera design felt strange, and it just didn't look like the pro aesthetic we've gotten used to, but after using it for a bit, it's actually grown on me quite a lot. The big visual change is the new camera plateau instead of the classic left-aligned square bump. It's similar to the iPhone Air's design, but scaled up, housing 3 camera lenses, the LiDAR sensor, the rear mic, and the flash all in one raised area. And as odd as it may look at first, it actually does serve a purpose because it's the only way to fit these new camera components, which we'll get into later. That redesign also meant Apple had to rethink the antennas. There's now a thin band around the plateau, and the millimeter wave window sits on top for US models. Still not the nicest looking thing in the world, but at least you stop noticing it after a few days. Unless you constantly stare at the top edge of your phone for some reason, but otherwise, it's fine. Everything else hardware-wise is pretty familiar. Power button and camera control on the right, volume and action button on the left, USB-C, speakers, and mics on the bottom. And then there's the colors. Yeah, I'm sure you've all seen by now, they went kinda bold this year. Cosmic orange, deep blue, and silver. I obviously went silver. The orange is quite loud, and as we've already seen over the past few months, the scratches on the blue show up pretty easily. No black this year, but maybe that's not the worst thing ever because, like the blue, it would probably get scratched up pretty easily. Now, that being said, silver's not immune. I somehow got a couple super tiny marks on both sides near the buttons. Now, yes, I don't use a case, so part of that is on me, but even then, I never drop my phone, and I'm usually pretty careful where I set it down, so that's something to keep in mind if you also go caseless. Now, one last thing about build, it is ever so slightly heavier than last year's model, despite being aluminum. It's not a huge deal, but you may notice a little extra heft while handling it. Moving over to the display, this phone is still rocking the 6.9-inch display, and it is still absolutely massive. Unless you're literally Shaq himself, using this phone one-handed is an athletic achievement. But the display itself still looks amazing. It's basically the same as last year, OLED, 120Hz, always on, and 2868 by 1320 at 460 pixels per inch. Only 2 upgrades this year are brightness and the new anti-reflective coating. Peak outdoor brightness is now 3000 nits, up from 2000, which sounds like a massive jump, but our perception of brightness is logarithmic, so a 50% increase in the nit value doesn't quite feel like a 50% bump to your eyes. So yes, it is brighter outdoors in direct sunlight, but it's not really life-changing. Then there's the anti-reflective coating, which is also nice, but it's also pretty subtle, and do keep in mind that it's completely nullified when you put a screen protector on, unless the screen protector itself has an anti-reflective coating. Before applying mine, it did look pretty similar to the iPhone Air's coating. But everything else is exactly what you'd expect. Dynamic Island is still doing Dynamic Island things, and Face ID continues to silently be one of the best iPhone features, in my opinion, of course. Although I do have to say, the under-display fingerprint reader on Android is pretty amazing as well. I can't lie. Now, performance is also exactly what you'd expect, which is to say, basically perfect. If you watch my iPhone Air review, it's the same story here. We've once again got the A19 Pro chip, but with one extra GPU core over the Air, which makes absolutely zero difference in day-to-day use. Between scrolling, switching apps, and all the other everyday stuff, everything is super smooth. The big difference is thermal performance. This is the first iPhone with a vapor chamber cooling system, and it actually does make a difference. The phone dissipates heat significantly faster, which means it can hold peak performance for much longer, whether that's during long gaming sessions or long video shoots. Though, I will say, if you try doing any of that outside while it's scorching hot, yes, you will still cook your phone and it will throttle performance and dim the display. Physics is still physics at the end of the day. The vapor chamber doesn't necessarily make the phone faster, but it does keep it from slowing down as fast due to temperature. And that is a pro improvement, even if you'll never notice it while scrolling Instagram or sending text messages. The Pro and Pro Max also technically have one more neural accelerator because of the extra GPU core, which gives it a slight increase in AI performance. In the real world, that just means anything that uses on-device AI, so stuff like cleanup tool in photos, writing tools, shortcuts with Apple Intelligence actions, all run a bit faster and don't heat up your phone as much. I actually tested this using an app called Locally AI, which lets you run Apple's on device Foundation large language model as well as a bunch of other available models. And using the Foundation model, I gave both the iPhone 16 Pro Max and the 17 Pro Max the same prompt, and you can actually see the 17 Pro Max generating its response slightly faster. It's not a night and day difference, of course, but it is noticeable and likely scales with more complex prompts or heavier AI tasks. It's definitely one of the areas where the extra juice of the Pro models actually shows up in normal use. Now, cellular performance is pretty similar to the 16 Pro Max. Apple's still using a Qualcomm modem here, and notably not the new C1X modem in the iPhone Air. The Air's modem is more power efficient, but in day-to-day use, you're not really going to notice a huge difference. The Pro models do support millimeter wave 5G in the US, which is the super high speed, super short range version of 5G that's really only useful in big cities and stadiums. It's not something most people run into often, but when you do, speeds are blazing. Then there's the new N1 networking chip, which handles Wi Fi 7, Bluetooth 6, and Thread, which are all very welcome upgrades. Now, in the battery department, we just crossed 5,000 milliamp hours, which is the biggest battery size we've ever seen in an iPhone. Now, yes, I know, Android phones have basically had this since the Declaration of Independence was signed, but hey, it's better late than never. But battery life is excellent. I quite literally never think about it. I keep my charging capped at 80%, and I still rarely see it dip below 50%. Even on heavier days, I usually end the day somewhere between 20 and 30%. Now, to be fair, I do use wired CarPlay everywhere I go, so it typically does get a 15 to 20 minute top up or two or three during the day, but even without that, it's super solid. And speaking of topping up, all the iPhone 17 models can now fast charge to 50% in about 20 minutes using at least a 40-watt charger, which is a really nice touch. But not the iPhone Air. It's still limited to 50% in 30 minutes with the 20-watt charger. Anyways, I also never use low power mode, partially because it drops the display's refresh rate to 60 Hz, but mainly because I just never need it. Even though my control center is full of low power mode toggles because I think that's funny, I never touch it. Or I guess them. Now, the camera system is easily the most pro part of this phone. All three lenses are now 48 megapixels, including the telephoto, which is a pretty big upgrade from that 12 we had before. The higher resolution means you can do a lot more cropping or zooming without sacrificing image quality, especially now that the telephoto has finally caught up to the main and ultrawide. The main lens gives you four focal lengths: 24, 28, 35, and 48 millimeters, with the 48 being the 2x crop from that 48 megapixel sensor. These actually do feel like intentional creative choices that give you a bit more flexibility when you're trying to get different looks. The telephoto lens goes even further with a 100mm 4x natively and a 200mm 8x sensor crop. Then you got the ultrawide at 13mm, which of course also doubles as a macro lens for any close-up photography. Now technically, yes, the 2x and 8x zooms aren't true optical zoom since they are cropping, but with 48 megapixels to work with, the results are still pretty good. On the front, you're getting the same upgraded 18 megapixel square sensor that all the series iPhones get. Definitely one of the most underrated upgrades this year. Because it's a square sensor, you can take landscape or portrait selfies regardless of what orientation you're holding the phone, which is super convenient for things like group shots or vlog style recording. The image quality is also so good, it holds up pretty well even against the rear cameras in both photo and video. And just to give you an idea of what all this looks like in real life, I'll put some of the photos I've taken up on screen here. Now, I'm not a photographer, of course, so if you want the full technical deep dive, definitely check out Tyler Stallman's review. But even as a casual user, I've been able to get some pretty sweet shots out of this camera. But where things really get ridiculous is video. You still look at 4K 120 FPS recording, which is already pretty crazy last year, and it still looks fantastic. But now you also get ProRes RAW, which no other phone can shoot. Just be warned, the file sizes are absolutely massive. Apple also added support for Genlock, which lets you synchronize the timing of multiple cameras recording simultaneously. But this is extremely professional level stuff. You'd of course need multiple Pro iPhones and a $300 Blackmagic Pro dock for each one to even use it. I will never use this feature because it would cost $1 million, but the fact that it exists on an iPhone is pretty wild. For my use case, this phone is an amazing B camera for B-roll, or even an A camera for situations where I just need to start recording in a pinch. And for a lot of creators, that might just be one of the biggest reasons to go with one of the Pro models this year. So this is the iPhone 17 Pro Max shooting in ProRes, not ProRes RAW notably, because I am not a professional, but this is what you should expect your footage to look like on the iPhone 17 Pro Max. And I'm recording to a Ugreen external SSD here. This is just like an enclosure that has a 1TB NVMe drive in it. So let's see how it sounds and looks. So, should you buy this phone? At $1,100 for the Pro and $1,200 for the Pro Max before trade-in, these are definitely not cheap. And for the vast majority of people, the base iPhone 17 will actually do everything pretty much perfectly for $800. Especially now that the base 17 literally has the same 120Hz always on display as the Pro model with the same size, resolution, and peak brightness. The only things you'd be missing with the base model are the telephoto lens, the larger screen if you're comparing to the Pro Max, and the sustained performance advantages. But for most people, that's probably not going to matter. But if you want the iPhone that pushes the furthest in camera quality, battery endurance, and sustained performance, the real professional features, this is the one. Feel free to let me know what you think about this year's lineup, or how it compares to its Android competitors like the Pixel 10 or the Galaxy S25 series. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.